All right, guys, you asked for it. It's going to be delivered to you. Get ready for it. I've got this thing over here on Tier Maker where we're going to rank everything on Tier Maker so you can see. And I just want to start off with the beginning of this video, kind of talking about this stuff. Maps are not included. I've already done a map. This is going to be the everything tier list except for the maps because they haven't changed. Endless has been altered. Enemies from the last video I made, enemies now have crowd control reduction. And the game doesn't lag out to cause enemies to run so fast they run slow, which makes some traps more viable, especially on Endless, like the flip and the wall blades, or not the wall blades, the wall spike. Those two have been buffed pretty hard because of that change within Endless. They become much more viable to use. Not saying they weren't viable before, but you were able to get away without using them and have better combos and scores and stuff. So you typically didn't bring them. But now you definitely need them to get really, really late game on Endless. So yeah, that's kind of buffed up their score a bit. It is based on my general usage of traps. You know, I'm probably not going to do floor spikes any favors here, but I do know that some people love to use them. They just spam them everywhere, and that's fine. You know, I'm not going to talk about how inefficient that is or anything, but unless you're using the Decoy, every trap is viable. I mean, yeah, you can use every trap, really. Just some feel easier to use than others. Some are safer to use than others. You know, depending on how I build my kill box, like I can leave and know that my kill box is going to do fine with certain traps over other traps. This is based upon the latest patch, so I had made several of these videos, and I wasn't exactly sure how to go about, you know, representing everything if I wanted to show it in game or whatever. And if I was showing it in game, it would take such a long time. There's so many items here to cover. So we're not going to do that. It's going to be a little bit quicker this time around. If you want to see me use them in game and whatnot, just stop by my stream. I play a lot, so, you know, check that out. Check out the videos I have, and you're probably going to see a lot of these traps being used. Even the decoys. Jokingly, the decoys there. So yeah, if you really wanted to see them, check that out. But otherwise, we're just going to kind of talk through them real quick. All the items in the spellbook to include heroes as well. The latest patch did some stuff to the Saw Blade launcher, did some stuff to the Arcane Dragon, to the lasers, that sort of thing. So, you know, depending on what the next patch is or the next DLC is, it could change some of those already. In which case, this would be possibly null and void, depending on what they change and how much they change of it. My own playstyle is ranged. I like the ranged. I like, well, being like medium ranged, I guess. I've even done weaponless with Egan. I've done maps, like legitimate maps with weaponless with Egan, as well as endless. So I don't mind getting up close and personal. Played Cygnus, you know, and used his stuff. So anyways, I've been playing this game for a long time. Ever since it came out in Stadia, day one, I've been playing it. But I tend to stick to the medium range to a little bit longer range kind of play style. And we'll talk about that when we talk about some of the items here. I decided I would try and get this percentage based on the amount of games I would play or have used this item, but I'm not sure that is an accurate depiction of what I actually rank them. I think what it's more based upon, the ranking that I'm going to use, is what it's supposed to do and how good it is at doing what it's supposed to do, in relation to maybe what it could be, or maybe in relation to the other traps that are supposed to do the same thing. So yeah, the first thing we're going to start with, though, is we're going to talk about some of the elements, because traps are supposed to do different things, and the elements are some of those things. When you combine elements, you can have multiple elements affecting the same entity. When you combine them all, you can end up getting some really nice combos, and the damage is increased and stuff like that. We are going to talk about that. The way that it's laid out, I laid it out per element. So it's base element. For example, Aerowall, you could get a fire upgrade. However, it's a physical damage trap. So we're going to talk about the Aerowall as a physical damage, and then what I rank it with all the upgrades and everything that you could do with it. For example, okay, so Acid applies a melting debuff, does plus 50% physical damage. So this stacks with the Stone, plus 30. It stacks with Ice, which is plus 30. And it stacks with Airborne, which is 2 times damage. It all stacks. To include the Stun secondary Crossbow upgrade from the Crossbow, that does bonus damage whenever the crossbow stuns. That entity takes bonus damage, and then there's also the wall blades that do bonus damage to enemies that are stunned. It all combos together. It all adds together. So you can do a lot of damage with that. So yeah, that's where acid is. The arcane element is 15% bonus damage to elemental sources, to include arcane itself. Physical damage is anything that says bleed or explosion, except for the firelings. The firelings do fire damage, but the sappers do physical damage as well as fall damage. Yeah, bleed, that sort of thing. Anything that's just normally physical. This is your most of your damage source in the game is going to be physical, just based upon the. I mean, you can see the list here compared to other things. But a lot of the physical stuff have the option to apply other elements instead. You have your war scenarios. I have those in their own category because we'll talk about them. They're pretty not needed. They're fun to use, but they're not needed, except for one of them maybe, and we'll talk about that. But their specialty is they have mountable things. They also have like knights and they're really powerful. They're really powerful, I guess I should say, because they're there to deal with lots of enemies, and there are lots of enemies on war scenarios. So there you go. Stone. Like I said, there's only one way to apply stone, and that's with stone staff, making it very unique. And it does plus 30% physical damage whenever enemies are stoned. You have burn. All sources of fire do burn damage, which is 7 damage a second per 4 seconds. Seven DPS per 4 seconds. And they do a 20% slow. All fire does burn. All burn does this. Brimstone is an exception, where Brimstone, whether fire or arcane, it does the same burn. It has its own burn mechanic, but it doesn't stack with the fire burn mechanic. Lightning does a shock. The shock's a 0.5 second stutter. It's not really a stun. In the game files, it's not listed as a stun. It's listed as shock, and it's 0.5 seconds. So whenever the enemy looks like he's getting zapped, like a cartoon, that's what it is. It's a 0.5 second thing. It doesn't seem to add to combos at all. It's just like a mechanic that's in the lightning thing. Also, enemies who die who were electrified, or while electrified, with that debuff, they explode, doing physical damage in an area of effect. Okay. This can help against the lightning bats. If you have a bunch of bats clumped together and one of them dies to electric, and it's like a fire bat, for example, sitting next to an electric bat, the electric bat will then take the collateral explosion damage. Ice is a freeze, which creates an effect that enemies frozen take plus 30% ice and physical damage, meaning ice buffs itself, basically. And then physical damage as well. Of course, they stack on other things, so ice will stack on arcane. If you have an arcane debuff and then you have the freeze debuff, then ice will do more than 30% bonus damage. And then you got crowd control, hard and soft. You got stuff like tar, barricades, flip traps, pounders with stun, push traps, gravity pillars, that sort of thing. Anything to move, push, or just not necessarily do damage, but just to cut crowd control. Window butterfly, the flower, distraction, jar ghost with the fear, that sort of thing. Those are all hards and soft CCs, and we'll talk about those. Okay, let's get into the very beginning of this. And the first thing we're going to talk about here is the Alchemist Satchel. The Acid Geyser. We're going to talk about the Acid Geyser. Now, the Acid Geyser I'm putting in an A tier. I'm going to give it an A+, but I'm right now putting it in A tier. There's only two things that do by default acid, plus there's 2 other things that can do acid, but they're not very good at it, in my opinion. The Acid Geyser is the best one to use, in my opinion, for acid. It spews out projectiles, so it can miss, but generally it doesn't miss. The closer you are to the center, the more likely you are to get affected by it. It's such a good floor trap, and it combos well with Tar and even Brimstone and Floor Scorcher. You could really combo them together, and you can have the wall and ceiling traps also be different elements and really make it work well. Plus, you have a lot of strong wall and ceiling traps that do physical damage, whereas in the floor traps, not so much. So having a floor trap that does acid while your wall and ceiling traps do physical is really, really good. It's also really good for combos. It is the best acid producing item in the game, in my opinion. It's the most accurate and the most reliable. So that's what it's supposed to do. Also, it has like a 20% slow, I think it was, or 80%. I don't know. It's like a small slow that whenever enemies walk on top of it, they get slowed a little bit. So yeah, acid, in my opinion, isn't necessarily one of the better ones, but it is useful, especially when you combo with other things. But for example, I would rather do freeze than acid, because not only does freeze give it 30% bonus instead of 50, but it also stops them in their tracks, you know, for whatever, how many ever seconds it freezes. And that's based upon the trap or the item freezing. They have different freeze durations, but overall, as far as acid goes, you know, it's a good trap to use for combo points. It's a good trap to bring if you're using co-op. Definitely a good trap to bring. One of you should probably bring it, if not, if both of you aren't. And I would only do the first unique upgrade. The upgrades are either the projectiles spew out for a longer duration, or the melting lasts longer. If you're going to kill enemies, you're going to waste that extra time, the extra melt duration. So if you put this in your kill box and they get melted for 6 seconds instead of 3 seconds, but you kill them in 2 seconds, what's the difference? There isn't. So I would rather more enemies be affected by it to add for more combos and then kill them, than have it last longer on fewer enemies and kill them anyways, is my opinion. So the second unique upgrade is pretty worthless. The first unique upgrade is definitely the one that you want. Let's talk about Alchemist Satchel. Don't even bother using it. Don't even bother using it. Let's talk about Arcane Dragon. They fixed it to where on co-op it no longer bounces multiple times. It needs to bounce multiple times. It needs to have a duration of, keep it where it was, 8 seconds. Now it's up 20 seconds, which is fine for long corridors, but it only bounces once, and that's a problem for me. What it's supposed to do is apply the arcane debuff. People complain about the damage. Listen, the damage is what it is. It's all about the arcane debuff. Because if you can toss this down through a corridor where you have lasers, which are, you know, elemental, you got I don't know, fire brim, or you got floor scorchers, and you got acid, and you've got wall chargers, doing lightning or whatever the case is, and this thing debuffs everything back and forth. I mean, come on, it's supposed to apply the debuff, and it does a really good job. The problem with it is, A, you waste the duration a lot of times, which is, I guess it's okay, but B, the really hard part is using it properly. There are some good places for it, but not all of them are that good. Plus, you can put the wall blades vertically, and the wall blades vertically, assuming you have a ceiling, will bounce back and forth as well. So, you know, you might want to use those instead, depending on your kill box and depending on, you know, what other kinds of sources of arcane you might have. But in my opinion, if I'm trying to push arcane, I'm more likely to use Brimstone for it anyways, because Brimstone's fire, and, you know, enemies are immune to fire. They're not immune to arcane. If I bring it, it's a little bit of damage over time, you know, a little bit of arcane buff, you know, debuff, whatever. So personally for me, I don't use it for my arcane. If they fix window of butterflies to apply the arcane debuff, window of butterflies would probably be my go-to for that, because I use it on arcane anyways for the DOT and the confusion for combo points. But yeah, it needs to be useful more places, and I think the way that it can be useful in more scenarios and more situations is if it bounced indefinitely for its duration. Then it could be used in a lot of different situations. You can have it, you know, bank off of, make trick shots, right? You bank off of the pipe, banks off a wall, banks off of something else, or it will bank off of a pipe, hit the wall, go back to the pipe, and run back through the lane. You know, it would require 4 bounces to do that, but it would do that, and that would fix it. So since that's not the case, it's really situational. It's hard to use in a lot of places and a lot of maps even. I guess it's a little bit expensive, but it's not too bad. What it's supposed to do, it does really well, but only in certain situations. So for that reason, got to give it a B tier. It kind of takes the top of the B tier list for me because it is good enough. But yeah, it's just got to stay there for me. All right, next item is the Arcane Staff. Arcane Staff for me is an A tier. It's an A plus tier, actually. An A plus tier weapon. It does good damage. It has a nice AoE. It looks really cool when it does the AoE. The AoE seems to be, the right mouse button AoE seems to be a little bit more RNG based. I would rather have the second upgrade than the first one. And the second upgrade, reduce mana cost. Yeah, I'd rather do a reduced mana cost than increase secondary radius. And the reason being is because if I increase the secondary radius, I'm less likely to hit things that are nearby me. I do wish it kind of worked like a Nautilus E. A Nautilus from League of Legends, his E ability is like a circle around him. It goes boom, and then the circle expands, and then has another hit, and the circle expands one more time and has another hit. That way it's a lot more accurate, so the things closest to you are all going to get hit. The things a little bit farther away, there might be a few misses. The ones farther away might be more misses, but the circumference will expand every trigger in like 3 triggers or something. That'd be pretty cool, but it's fine where it is, I think. I would just much prefer the reduced mana cost, so A, I can spam it, and B, it's more likely to hit things nearby me versus things farther away. Other than that, it does the arcane debuff really well. The right mouse button does affect a lot of things, so it's pretty good. For me, the Arcane Staff gets an A+. Now let's talk about the Scepter of Dom, or the SOD, as it's called. The SOD, for me, gets an S tier. Okay, I know I put it lower on my previous video. New information has come to light, and new testing has come out with this weapon. I put it on S- though. Okay, so it's not like top tier S. It's like maybe a little bit farther down. You can get essentially a ×5 combo with this one weapon, but it's hard to line up. The right mouse button will take control of any enemies. It doesn't really help you on endless very much, but late game endless anyways. But it does help. And the left mouse button press and hold gives you a knockback. I prefer no knockbacks. Generally, my playstyle is I don't like things moving around in my barricades because they can fall out of my barricades, fall over a wall, into the rift, that sort of thing. The rate of fire is pretty unlimited, almost. I would recommend using an auto clicker, not spamming and with your finger and breaking your mouse or anything. But there's controversy behind using an auto clicker. Most people, like probably 98% of people, say that it's okay, it's whatever, it's an offline game, it's casual, whatever the case is. But I have had comments with me using it in the past. People, unhappy and unpleased that an auto clicker exists and needs to be used in this game. For that reason, I don't use it. Because the moment I start spam clicking my mouse, it's the moment people are going to start saying, "Oh, you're auto clicking," and try not using macros and try being good at the game. And it's just like, it's not worth it for me. But it's only for me as a content creator. For you, it still might be worth it. So yeah, it's a really good item. It's a really good weapon. I see a lot of people use it and use it very effectively. It's nice. So if you're having trouble, especially on Secret Fortress, is where it really shines. I think is really where it starts to shine. Is on Secret Fortress, because you can right mouse button the armored ogre. There's another armored ogre that comes out, a troll that comes out, that sort of thing. So if you're having trouble on that level specifically, try using the Scepter of Domination and see how well it helps you. Enemies that die with the right mouse button who are charmed, they do an explosion. So the enemy hits an enemy, that's a unique source of damage. Then they explode. Then that enemy, you right mouse button them, so now they're mind controlled. But then you auto attack them once, and then you hold down the left mouse button and you blow them up. And then guess what? Those are all combos stacking with just one item, and it doesn't use mana to do the charge to the knockback, the charge to the blast. So it can definitely be pretty good. I like it. I wouldn't change anything about it. It has a lot of mechanics. Yeah, a lot of mechanics. Probably the most mechanically enhanced item in the whole game is the Scepter of Dom. So, use it if you want to. I rated it at S- just because it's not the best in every situation. If you're building a corridor, depending on how you're trying to build your kill box, if you're building a corridor, you don't want to use it necessarily, right? Like you want to keep all of the enemies crowd controlled. It doesn't have an area of effect crowd control for big guys, especially kind of like the Stone Staff or the Ice Amulet does. And the single target damage is fine, but it's not great. Even if you're spamming it, it's not the best. So for those reasons, I don't give it an S or an S+. I do have to give it an S-. Aerowall. Okay, now we're down to the physical damage traps. Aerowall, for me, is a solid A. It's got one of the highest damage potentials in the game because each arrow does damage. It can get blocked by barricades. It can miss enemies altogether. Kobolds are pretty hard hitting for it because they run past it before they get affected. It seems to be a little bit RNG as to which arrows fire. You get 4 volleys of 9 arrows each, and they take over 1.2 seconds as they take to volley. So every 0.3 seconds there's a volley that shoots off. And yeah, if an orc gets lucky, an orc can walk through it, trigger, get hit by every single one of them, or get hit by most of them and die, or walk through them, trigger them, and get hit by none of them and walk away unharmed. Depending on how you have it placed. I would always place it shooting into a line because, and I wish they did this with more traps, the arrow projectile range is actually twice as far, a little bit more than twice as far than the trigger range. So if you have a bunch of enemies walking into it, then the first enemy that walks into its trigger range is actually going to trigger it, and the enemies behind it are going to get hit. Whereas a lot of traps, like the ice wall, for example, the first enemy that walks in front of it's going to get affected by it, but every enemy behind them is going to walk up on its cooldown. And so, you know, it kind of lowers its efficiency. But yeah, the Aerowall is super efficient with what it does, and it's cheap. I just don't think it's the best because you really want to place it in a corridor shooting into enemies. You don't want to place it on the wall shooting horizontally from enemies. So for me, it gets an A tier, but it's definitely a solid trap, and I love the fact you start with it. I just wish I wouldn't see people putting it, you know, horizontally, putting it, you know, facing into a kill box, I should say. Next thing is Autoballista. For me, it's a C tier. Autoballista is C tier. You know, they tried to buff it, but what they need to do is it's going to be hard to do, unless they allow you to do something maybe specific before you join the game. And that's to have it have targeting, right? If it could only target the big guys, then the Autoballista would be good. But it has wasted damage when it has overkill damage, basically, right? The 75 damage is going to overkill an orc. It's going to overkill light orc. It's going to almost overkill a heavy orc, but 2 shots and it's overkill. Overkill isn't necessarily bad, but when it's on such a low cooldown and it has a single target attack, you want to maximize the usage of it. So you want it to attack the big guys, right? Yeah, I know it needs a targeting system, and I know that it's a hard thing to program a targeting system in, especially if you're targeting, if each individual ballista has its own targeting, then that's more the game has to remember, and it's going to be a really hard thing to program. It might make the game possibly unstable for certain platforms, I don't know, and certain computers, because there's just more computing that has to go on. There's a way before the game that you could say that Autoballistas only target very heavy enemies. That would be really good. But unfortunately, that's not the case. I know people would use them if you could do that. People would absolutely use them only for very heavy enemies. I know that. So maybe they'll introduce a new ballista, like a big game hunting ballista, and have that be what it does. Also, if there was ever a time for percent health damage, I think it would be the ballista. Percent health damage would be a really good chance for the ballista to shine. But other than that, I gotta give it a C tier. It misses a lot for me. It can miss enemies, but it misses the mark for me as far as what a good trap is and what it's supposed to do and how well it does it. I just don't think it does it very well. So it's not even situationally based. I mean, I'd bring it on the basement just because I have ceiling trap to do it, but yeah. Overall, it's just a C tier for me. All right, now we got Blade Staff. Now, I used to put Blade Staff up in S tier, but because I wanted to make this more about my playstyle, I don't use it very that often. But every time I use a melee weapon, it's going to be a Blade Staff, right? For me, Blade Staff is A tier, A plus tier actually. It does several things. Mechanically, it does a knockup, which also does damage. Enemies airborne, and also ragdolled, so before they stand back up, take double damage, right? So you increase the efficiency of this item, or of this weapon, with this weapon, by doing your right mouse button. Plus, the right mouse button doesn't cost a lot of mana. And you heal. When you combine it with a healing trinket and a jar of ghosts, you're almost invincible. And even if you do like a freedom of movement trinket, which no one ever runs, but if you did, theoretically, you'd really be set for life. Flyers are a little bit of an issue, but the right mouse button still hurts flyers. You can still hit flyers if they're low enough. But yeah, I really like the Blade Staff as a melee weapon. One of the best in my opinion. It's got a lot going for it, so yeah, that's definitely A plus tier. Blunderbus is an S minus tier for me. It takes care of itself and it buffs itself. If you're gonna bring just one weapon, and it's not the Blade Staff because you're going to want to go range. I value range a little bit more than melee. Blunderbus is a weapon for you. It's a good weapon. It'll freeze, and the damage it does is buffed because of the frozen enemies. On top of that, the freeze is an area of effect. It's pretty small comparative to other things that can freeze and whatnot. but it can really help you take care of the big guys. The drawback for it is that it is a shotgun, therefore the projectiles will, some of them will be dropped and some of them will miss, and if it's a smaller enemy, it might be hard to hit, like a runner, because it's not super accurate. You had to be close range to use it effectively, and if there's TNT archers or no grenadiers or something that can also affect your playstyle, you want to, you know, play a little bit farther away from your kill box so they don't disrupt your barricades or they don't kill you or whatever. But at the same time, if you play away from your kill box, you're not going to be pumping as much damage from your character in as to the kill box as you can otherwise do, and therefore kind of minimizing the efficiency of having this weapon as a ranged weapon. One of the things I see people do a lot is spam the right mouse button. Don't spam the right mouse button. Use it, go right mouse button, left, 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 reload, right mouse button, left, 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 reload, right mouse button, and just kind of cycle your mana through that way. It's going to give you a lot more control over the course of the fighting, and you don't need to spam your right mouse button. It's really not necessary. Because by the time you're done with your 4 shots and the reload, the ice has just popped off the enemy, so you just pop it on the enemy again, run through your 4 shots and again. So, but yeah, overall, it's got good damage. Close range accuracy is nice. It can really take care of a lot of things itself. It buffs itself. For what it's supposed to do, for me, I give it an S-. All right, let's talk about the cream of the crop, the rise to the top, the boom barrel roller dispenser. The roller and Unchained dispenser in 1 and 2. The boom barrel dispenser is, in my opinion, one of the best traps in the game. But Motor Man Dan, I don't see you hardly using it. Well, yeah, sure, because I use other traps. But it's one of the best traps in the game. For what it's supposed to do, it does it really, really, really well. Also, it can be placed and used in places other traps cannot be. It is unique, it is one of a kind in that it can be placed super duper high up on the wall and affect things on the ground. No other trap in the game can do it, no other weapon, trinket, anything. Nothing else can do it in the game except for the boom barrel roller on any map. Plus, it's got explosions, and explosions are freaking sweet. Okay, listen, I know what you're saying. But it doesn't do a lot of damage. It does a lot of damage. It does a lot of area effect damage, and it stacks really well when you've got ice on your wall, when you've got a stone staff, when you got acid underneath, and when you got something to lift them up. When you got all that stuff, or a flip trapper or something, and they go ragdoll and they go airborne or whatever the case is, and then you got a boom barrel just dropping on them, boom, baby, it is a killing machine. Plus, you can stack them up and double slam Egan, or do the double jump slam on Egan and pop them all. They can chain react if you want them to. The one thing I don't like about it is the second unique upgrade. The second unique upgrade is the decreased explosion from height distance. 5 squares to 2 squares. A square is basically a butterfly trap, is 1 square tall. Or the saw blade launcher is a 1 square by 2 squares kind of thing. So, then the arrow wall is a 2 by 2. So, yeah. So 5 squares to 2 squares. It's pretty unusable as far as the upgrade's concerned. You really don't want it exploding like super close. And there's a lot of things that can explode the barrels, to include yourself. Other traps will explode it a lot of times. So, you know, it's really not, it's kind of a wasted unique upgrade if you get this. I would absolutely do explosion radius. It's more damage in more space, affecting more enemies. Why you wouldn't do the explosion radius, I have no idea. Don't get the explosion height distance, only if you want to, I guess. I'm not trying to tell you how to play, I'm just trying to tell you how I play and what makes sense to me, and it makes sense to do explosion radius. More explosion radius equals more damage in an area. Okay? Cool. S+ tier for me. Okay, let's talk about the broadsword. For the broadsword, I give it an A tier. Maybe even like close to A-, but I think it's an A tier. The healing is good. The attack speed is not that great, but the healing is kind of makes up for that, right? I think it's like 15 health per second now. It used to be 10 health, and they said they buffed it, so I'm assuming 15. Could be 20. Blade Staff heals you 5 hit points per attack. There's a broadsword is broadsword's, yeah. Used to be 10 hit points per attack, but they buffed it. The broadsword is definitely A tier for me, because it does pretty good damage. And like on melee weapons, you know, it does area of effect damage whenever you swing it, so the more enemies are next to you, the better. Melee weapons are good for clearing out smaller enemies than larger enemies, obviously. The right mouse button is a little bit finicky and hard to use. You want to use it in a straight corridor. The lightning attacks are... they're like a small area of effect, a really small area of effect. And they are spread out by 2 squares each, so basically by a single tar trap. So each projectile that comes out of the right mouse button affects enemies near it, but not like in between the 2 projectiles, not in between the projectiles that are used by the right mouse button. So it's a little bit inaccurate in that sense. I wish it was maybe like a line and the entire line was affected by it instead of the enemies in between the lightning strikes kind of like dodge them, I guess. But it's fine. It looks cool and it helps with combos. And if you got a long corridor, this is a thing that I would spam right mouse button on. If you have a nice long corridor for it. But I still don't think it's as good as the blade staff. But as far as melee weapons go, it's an A tier for me. Let's talk about Ceiling Pounder. I think Ceiling Pounder is a little bit too expensive for what it does, and what it does is not very great. There's plenty of other ways to do stun in the game. And ceiling traps, there are just plenty of better ceiling traps. Ceiling is the highest valued real estate in the game because ceiling shows up less than wall and less than floor. So you typically want your ceiling traps at least to be worth it, to be good, right? And the Ceiling Pounder just doesn't cut the mustard, man. It is low damage. The stun is fine, but it's only a stun. It's not a freeze. Stunning doesn't buff any other sources of damage at all by default. So it's not as good as freeze or distraction even, because it doesn't send enemies back so they can clump up on each other. I mean, it's an okay thing CC wise, but yeah, the Pounder just has a long cooldown. Even though it's cheap and you could spam it, it has a long cooldown. It's only going to affect one enemy that walks under it. If you have multiple enemies, it will affect them. But, you know, the trigger speed is pretty quick. So an enemy walks underneath it and it goes boom, it triggers off. And then the enemies behind it walk past it. And then it doesn't do anything to them. And it doesn't even kill the enemy that it pummeled the first place. So then he's going to start walking past the next one if you stack them. Yeah, I don't like it too much. I can see the possibility of doing Eye Start Spitter with Pounder, Stun, with Wall Blade, bonus damage to stunned enemies kind of thing. But unless you're really trying to combo with something that's actually good, it's not. So, for me, Ceiling Pounder gets a C-. Crossbow. Crossbow for me gets an S-. It has a zoom function, which is nice, as well as a long burst zoom function. It's got a high rate of fire. It's really good to combo. You kind of need to combo with something else, but it is really good to combo with another weapon. It does have a long range stun, which is nice. And the stun has been buffed in the area of effect that it does, so it's more of like a full tar trap tile than it is a what it used to be, which seemed to not be very much at all. So that's good. The stun lasts 3 seconds. All stun in the game lasts 3 seconds, except for the ogre stun on you. But all player-based stuns last 3 seconds. So it's not too bad. The headshot damage is nice, and it's like I said, got a really high rate of fire. You know, you're not going to be doing a ton of overkill damage. You can quickly jump over to an enemy, you know, pummel him down with crossbow shots, jump over to another enemy, pummel him down with crossbow shots, and bounce from headshot to headshot. Plus, the headshot damage on kill is really nice. If you have a bunch of enemies stacked up, you can just like take out a bunch of the small guys, and by the time you're done, you know, stun staff or ice amulet. By the time you're done, the big guys who are next to the small guys are already half health, and you just pummel them down with headshots, and then they're dead. So, yeah, crossbow. I like the crossbow a lot. Either upgrade really is pretty good, depending on how you build your kill box and how much you're going to be involved in it. Either of the upgrades is good for that. Dart Spitter. Dart Spitter is the other S++++ tier. This is the trap. Okay, this is the cream of the crop. Rise to the top. I know I said that about the Boom Barrel Roller, but I was kidding. It's actually the Dart Spitter. Dart Spitter is the #1 trap that you need in your inventory. Dart Spitter with ice. Dart Spitter with ice. Now, like I said, ceiling is the most valuable real estate space in the game for most maps. It's going to be hard to use on a map like Coliseum, obviously, or even a little bit hard to use on Slagfield, maybe. Ice Stars is so good. Okay, there's a couple of enemies that are pretty tough in the game, and those are Earth Lords, Armored Ogres, Mountain Trolls, and Fire Lords. Fire Lords take bonus damage from it. Earth Lords take bonus damage from it. They buff their own damage, so anytime they freeze an enemy, the enemy's going to take bonus damage from its own, from the Dart Spitters. The Dart Spitters do a good amount of damage, and when they freeze, they do even more damage. Before Saw Blades came out on Stadia, this trap is how we dealt with Armored Ogres and Mountain Trolls. The Dart Spitter with ice is the way that we dealt and shredded the big boys, and it still is. It is a beautiful trap. If you're having a hard time with Armored Ogres, if you're having a hard time with Earth Lords, if you're having a hard time with Mountain Trolls, use the Ice Dart Spitter. It is the best trap for it. It will absolutely shred. You just stack them, a whole bunch of them in a corridor, and they will shred everything. It's a little bit not as accurate for the little guys, but that's why you have other traps like floor traps and wall traps, is to help maybe, you know, siphon out the little guys and just keep the big guys there. All right, let's talk about the Decoy. The Decoy for me is definitely garbage tier. Don't use it. The Dwarven Warhammer for me gets a B tier. You know, it's pretty fun to use, but not really. It's, I don't know, it's mediocre. It's probably middle of the road for melee weapons. Again, you know, I value melee a little bit less than ranged. And the Dwarven Warhammer is just hard to use. I would say hard to use. I kind of wish I had a little bit of a reach, or maybe like that pointy end would actually be used. Like you could do close range swipe, close range swipe, long range poke, like a jab almost. Like its damage is high and the right mouse button is fun, and it may actually be better. I used to give it maybe like a B- or a C+. It may be better if you stack it with acid, because then you can keep enemies, you know, you can kind of like clump enemies up on an acid geyser, and then with your spin, and then your spin will do more damage to them and stuff. The mana cost for the right mouse button is actually not very much, so you can use it to like trip enemies. Basically, you just do like a one right mouse button and then a left mouse button, but it's so slow. The enemies will quickly overrun you, they'll run past you. You know, Kobold runners are going to be a really hard thing to deal with as well. So because the spin, even the right mouse button spin can miss them. They can run right past you. Ogres can still stun you with it. Maybe if it had like a CC immunity added into it, and they would remove the freedom trinket and put CC immunity into the Dwarven Warhammer while spinning, that would be okay. I would like that. But here we are. As far as it's like survivability and everything, and for what it does does okay, but I think it's easier to use some of the other melee weapons than it is the Dwarven Warhammer. But it's by no means it's bad. It's just not as good as some of the other ones, in my opinion. Elven short swords. I cannot get past where this is. It still, for me, isn't that good. And I've used them. But there's no survivability, there's no crowd control, there's nothing to help you survive in melee combat like you have on the other three melee weapons. There's nothing there. Nothing. It has a high rate of attack, sure, and your attacks do interrupt enemy attacks, but the amount of enemies that you're attacking is a lot less, because their area of effect is a lot less, depending on which swipe you're on. There's 5 total swipes for this weapon, for the animation, for the attack. I just can't get behind them. The upgrades are pretty garbage for all the upgrades that you get. For the weapon, they need to, like, I don't know, increase the attack range or something with it. I don't know, but it's pretty bad. In my opinion, you know, like I said, I value range. I have a ranged playstyle more than melee, but if I went melee, I would probably not ever choose I would choose the other three, you know, way faster than I would ever want to choose the Elven short swords. So yeah, I can't get past them. Like, the right mouse button is like an infinite pierce that the projectile lives forever. I guess it's cool. You could kind of spam it, but it just doesn't do a lot of damage. So typically your traps will kill everything before you need to spam the right mouse button of this to clear like a line of enemies. And the area of effect for the right mouse button isn't very large either. So it's kind of hard to hit everything. Even if it's in a line, it's still hard to hit everything because they're staggered in a line. Yeah, I just can't get behind the Elven short swords. They just don't do it for me. Maybe they do it for you. Maybe you've found a better time using them, but yeah, It was pretty garbage for me. All right, Grinder. Grinder, I got to put in the C+. I know it's a lot of people's favorites, and they loved it in the other games, and I loved it in Unchained as well, as much as the next guy. The problem is that the damage that is buffed from all these other sources doesn't buff the Grinder. It misses the buffs from the Grinder. Yes, technically it will do more damage, but it has a damage cap, and so when it does damage, it has like its lifespan. You see like a little health bar on it, right? And the more damage it does, the shorter that goes. When it gets down to 0, it has to go on cooldown. If you take an enemy and you buff it to take more damage, then the Grinder will do that more damage. But then the health bar will also go down that much more. So it has a maximum damage cap. That's the problem, is you can't buff the damage done by the Grinder unless you can increase that damage cap or have it negate the bonus damage taken as part of the reduction in or as part of the damage cap, like amount, right? Or part of the damage used up, I guess I should say, the pool of damage. So if it could do the multiplicative damage but then not use up, or only use up the regular ticks of damage, then it would be good. Then it would be fine, because then you would want to buff the damage as much as you could with enemies in front of a Grinder, but you can't. So it really falls short. It's a physical damage trap. There's plenty of ways to buff physical damage, and it just hurts it. It hurts it more than it helps it, because then it'll go down on cooldown faster. I guess the uptime, the damage over time for a full minute or a full 2 minutes is going to be higher overall, but you know, it might go on cooldown when you need it not to be. And of course, I guess that's the same for every trap, but I don't know. I just, for me, it just doesn't do it for me. I think that they need to maybe leave it where it is, but make it only cost like $750, like as much as the wall blades, right? It needs to be as pricey as the wall blades, not as pricey as a wall charger. And they also need to remove that, or walk around the damage cap thing to where it can be utilized with other sources of buffing the physical damage done. All right, let's talk about Guardian Archer. For me, it's a B-. It's a one square tile, so it is unique in the fact that you can place it where you can't place most other traps, except for the decoy, but you're not going to bring the decoy because you're good at the game. So yeah, for the Archer, my biggest problem is it doesn't come back on Rift Lord unless you sell the platform and then rebuy it, but you don't have enough time to sell a bunch of them. They die one shot to a lot of things as well, or 2 shots even. Gnolls will target them instead of going straight into the rift, so if you have them, Gnolls are going to be a problem. You're going to have to take care of them. TT archers are a big weakness of theirs. Anything ranged that aggroes is a pretty big problem. They did buff them 10 to 12 damage. They attack pretty quickly. They're an okay damage output, but they're not that great. I mean, you could essentially like spam a crap ton of them and probably be okay. But for me, they're more of an afterthought than they are a like, let me bring this because it's really efficient kind of thing. And the fact that you have to micromanage their health and selling them and replacing them, that's just not something I care to do too much. So for me, that's why I give them a B-. All right, Haymaker is a C- for me. It's cool in the fact that it does quite a bit of damage and takes care of regular guys, but it does absolutely nothing to big guys except for a small sprinkle of damage, and that in and of itself is a problem. Pounder does a stun. The Ice Dart Spitter freezes, right? They take care of the big guys as well as the small guys. The Haymaker, not a fan. It'll lift them, it'll knock them, but it might push them into or out of other traps that you may or may not want to be triggered at the time. It can push them over barricades. It can knock them, over barricades and stuff. It's not that great. It's not as consistent as something like the Gravity Pillar, which keeps enemies in the same spot. This one knocks them around and makes them fly. It's cool to look at. It's fun to use, but as far as its effectiveness and doing what it's supposed to do and all that, it just kind of falls short for me. So I have to give the Haymaker C-. All right, now we're going to do the Magic Longbow. I put Egan in that because I that's the only one I didn't have when I uploaded all the files, and I already had sorted everything out, and I didn't want to have to resort everything out. So Egan Ghost Egan is going to be our he's going to be our placeholder for the Magic Longbow. The Magic Longbow for me is an S- tier. It can do a lot. The right mouse button can shred big guys pretty easily, but you're going to run out of mana quick. So if you want to use something else, like Egan's double jump or whatever, or if you want to use like a stone staff or an ice amulet, you're going to have a hard time using other things with it. The weapon itself has a pretty good combo rate because it has physical and bleed. Bleed is a source of physical, but it's its own combo point, which is cool. Especially if you're not running other kinds of bleed, it's pretty good for combos. The right mouse button does knock over small guys, which is nice. Knock them back anyways. It doesn't like blow them over barricades or whatever, but it will push them backwards. So that's good. Extra combo point there. Its own source of damage, and then you got your auto attack and your bleeds 4 times combo. So that's good. Then, like I said, you can kind of shred big guys. If they get too close, you can just pop your right mouse button a bunch. And it'll do quite a bit of damage. So overall, you know, it's an S-. It does a little bit of everything, but it just doesn't do it super well. There are better ways to do the same thing in the game. So, yeah. It's an S-. The Ripsaw. Now, I know some of you guys are like, what? It's an A tier. Yes. The Ripsaw is an A tier. Why isn't it an S tier? Because it's too good at what it does. It kills enemies too quickly that you can't get combos on. Plus, it's a floor trap, so it's kind of hard to space, and it's an awkward shape. That's a little bit hard to space, in my opinion, with other floor traps that you're going to be adding to get more combos. Combos aren't everything, but they do equal score, or they do equal money. More combos is more money, and more money is more traps. More traps is more chance of success, and less, you know, issues with everything else. And so if you can generate yourself 7s and 8 combos instead of 2s and 3s, or 2 doesn't exist, but 3s and 4s, then you're going to find yourself with extra cash to be able to help your defenses and help with enemies and stuff like that. So getting higher combos or getting better combos are always a good thing to strive for, even if you're not striving for score and not trying to really min-max or optimize your scoring potential. But Ripsaws really put a rip in that. They kill things so well. There's so much overkill that they make it hard for you to get those combos and for you to generate that extra cash. So for that reason, I don't use them. Also, they're a little bit awkward as their footprint is a little bit awkward. All that being said, I definitely give them an A tier. They have a good amount of damage. If you get the ice upgrade and you spam a bunch of other ice traps, you get the freeze wall, you get the ice dart spitters, you can put these on the ground, put tar in front of them, so more enemies are affected by them. I mean, you're doing a record ton of damage. Let me tell you, you are going balls to the walls. This thing is going to shred a lot of dudes, but it doesn't have anything else going for it. It goes on a long cooldown as well, so it's really hard to keep traps or keep enemies stuck on top of it. If there was a wall trap like the spiderweb wall, it would be so much better. If we had the web wall that would slow enemies as they walk next to him, it'd be so much better. Or basically tar trap for the wall. Then these would be just astronomically good. But there's not, so it's an A tier for me. It's a little bit too much overkill. Not great for combos, but it will absolutely kill. Saw Blade Launcher now takes a spot in the A tier for me. Some people say, oh, it's unplayable now. The game's unbeatable. They nerfed the Saw Blade Launchers to Oblivion. No, it's fine. They're good. They're really good for what they do, physical damage and bleed. So that's good. But yeah, overall, they're not like super overpowered anymore. They're not necessary to bring, but they are a very good way to provide that bleed debuff on enemies because they bounce around a lot. So they can bounce around in a kill box, bleed everything. You can stack with the Arcane Dragon. The Arcane Dragon arcanes everything from far away, and then you can use all your other traps closer range that are closer ranged traps, and then they can do the killing, and then you get a much more consistent higher combos. Spike Trap. Spike Trap for me, get to C. It's not C minus though. I'll put it right here. Spike Trap for me is a bit it has a bit to be desired, right? Like the unique upgrades don't help the trap be better. It just changes the damage type. For me, the lightning to arcane to physical. I wish the unique upgrades did something to make the trap actually better, right? Like the Aerowall, for example, has Pierce with the unique upgrade, which means you're probably going to use that because now you're doubling the damage. Whereas the spikes, you're only changing the damage type. Now, I know some people say they like spamming these everywhere, and sure, that's fine, but you're going to, hurt your combo potential, which is going to hurt your coin, which is going to possibly hurt your late game. Especially if you're trying to play on like Rift Lord Plus difficulty, if that mod ever comes out, or when it comes out. I'm sure it will, because that's one of the things that it's working on. Then spike traps are going to be something to kind of stay away from, potentially. But who knows? Maybe it's just the thing to go for. If traps cost more money or something, or enemies are just too abundant, I guess. My problem is that they have such a low cooldown, and one enemy can trigger them, and it won't kill them. So an enemy triggers it, it doesn't even kill him, and then it goes on a long cooldown, and it just affects the one dude. Everything else runs by. Kind of like the same way with Pounder. Because it's cheap, it's just not that good. And I prefer quality over quantity, because quality gives you combos, and you can easily, there's some good quality traps that are also fairly inexpensive. And the floor spike is not one of them. So for me, the floor spike, it gets to see if they had a unique upgrade that helped it be better than what it is, then that'd be fine. I would like that, but just changing the damage type isn't good enough for me. So yeah, for that reason, I have to give the floor spike a C tier. All right, let's talk about the spike wall. It is now an A tier trap. So, like I said in the beginning of this video, Endless has changed. Endless has changed in the fact that enemies have crowd control reduction, but one of the things that's not reduced is the animation for an enemy falling down and getting back up. Meaning, anything that knocks down the big guys is going to be exponentially more useful the later the waves go, because the animation is still there. Now, the crowd control reduction, caps out at 80%, but this will keep them secluded in an area longer than crowd control ever will. Even if you have like a crap ton of snow cannons, assuming that they fire and target the same thing. On top of that, it has a ×3 combo potential, because it has a knockback, it has damage by default, which some of these other traps probably should have as well. Looking at you, Push Trap. This is 400 coin per square, right? So, and the Push Trap's what, 350? That should tell you something, right? And this thing can affect the big guys. I mean, it's cheap. It does a ×3 combo, whether you get bleed or stun, depending as long as you don't have bleed or stun somewhere else. It's a ×3 combo by itself. It takes care of the big guys. The animation of them falling down and getting back up helps on Endless. Spike Wall is a good trap. Plus, you can put it vertically instead of horizontally. You can put it vertically, and you'll knock orcs up, 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 and then you can put one at the very top and have it swing horizontally and bat them out of the stage. That's pretty fun too. So it's a really fun trap to use if you're going to go late game Endless, because enemies have enough health for you to do that. Yeah, so for me, they definitely get an A tier. All right, Stone Staff. It is an S+ tier. It is God tier. I'm going to put it maybe right there. I'll put it right there. The Stone Staff for me is pretty crutch. I use it all the time. You have to be close range for it, but it stuns everything right in front of you. By stun, I mean stone. Stones everything right in front of you, allowing you to land up those beautifully perfect hit shots. It doesn't cost a ton of mana. They did make it cost more mana, but it's still fine. On top of that, guess where it really shines? Just take a guess. Bet you couldn't guess. Flyers. Insta kills flyers, except for the flyer boss, because he can't be stunned or stoned or frozen or any of that. He can't be insta killed, but all of the other flyers can be insta killed. It is a beautiful weapon to use. It is like the weapon to use on Slagfield and even Order Enclave, because those are tough maps. Stone Staff is the weapon. It does something very unique that other weapons just cannot reproduce. Stone Staff is S+ tier. Easy peasy. All right, Swinging Mace. Now, I used to put Swinging Mace up in B tier, possibly A-, back on Stadia, because it was actually that good. But now on Steam, they managed to do something that I'm not entirely sure how it worked or whatever, but they did something with the hitbox of the Swinging Mace, I think. They made it to where the ball and spikes is actually like hits less enemies around it. I'm not really sure how they did that or why, but yeah, it doesn't affect as many enemies anymore. It's better to put horizontal, and enemies do like move, but the big enemies won't get ragdolled. They'll just like slightly bump over. It needs to ragdoll big enemies, and it needs to have a bigger hitbox. Those are two pretty glaring mechanical issues, or at least the hitbox thing. Maybe not the being knocked over. Maybe it has to be like a little bit higher price, maybe pop it back up to 1500, but then, you know, give it its original swinging mace area of effect, and then let it ragdoll big enemies, and then maybe it'll be good. I don't know. It's lacking. It's hurting. I've tried to use it, and it falls short to my expectations. So yeah. They definitely nerfed it, probably unintentionally, from Stadia days, and it's just a little bit unfortunate. So yeah, C- for me. Yeah, they need to fix it. Okay, wall blades, A-. Yeah, I'd still probably give them A-. I think the potential is there with the acid now being added in as an element, but I think A- is probably where I would sit it. You know, it's kind of like the budgeted version of the wall charger, plus it doesn't have any crowd control, and crowd control is king, as it always is. But it does pretty decent damage, and it does have bleed, so if you don't have bleed on something else, it can be a ×2 combo for you. It's got a lower cooldown than the wall charger, so it's a pretty good, you know, for that purpose. If I was running an all physical damage trap setup, I would always bring this. Definitely bring this over Aerowalls anyways, but not because of its not because of its damage potential, just because of its ease of use, I should say. You know, you can put it anywhere on the walls and it'll be effective, whereas Aerowalls is kind of situational, even though they have like a superb amount of damage. I'd probably actually bring both, to be honest. But yeah, the saw blades, or wall blades I should say, they're pretty good. I would encourage you to try and use them more often than I use them. But yeah, they're just physical with bleed. So if you have something else to do with physical or bleed, which typically if you're using a weapon, you're probably doing physical, because most things do physical damage. If you're using like the longbow, you might have bleed already. If you got saw blade launcher, you got bleed already, maybe. So then this goes stun, and then you want to bring something to stun to help it. Then you lose a combo point. So on and so forth. But yeah, I could definitely see you kind of building around this trap as a centerpiece of trap. So for that reason, I give it an A-. All right, now we're on to our miscellaneous traps, which is only one of them. Barricades. It is possible to beat a lot of maps barricadeless, but they're just so good. I mean, they're just great. You can really force enemies down corridors, down pathways. You can put them atop of stairs, and sappers will ignore them because sappers don't like going upstairs. They'll go around to the back end of them, so you can really reroute enemies and make checkpoints a thing. And they're just so unique. They're the only thing that does it. I mean, they're just so good. They're S+ tier for me. Easy peasy. And they got buffed by the doubles costing 100 less. All right, let's talk about fire traps. Brimstone for me gets a bit of an A+ here. You know, for me, Brimstone and Acid guys are pretty interchangeable. Whenever I run Brimstone, I always run Arcane, but that's only because a lot of times there are fire immune enemies, and I don't really care to like go back out and change my unique upgrade a lot. Plus, there's a better way to pump out fire damage. But I think as far as consistent Arcane, I think if you can't use the Arcane Dragon, which it's very situational, I think you can always use the Brimstone and have a pretty good effect on it. So I would use Arcane Brimstone to pump out the Arcane debuff, and it works pretty well. Plus, it helps take out the runners, and if you put your barricades back in the back on certain maps, and you put Brimstone in front of it, it's going to take care of sappers, that sort of thing. So yeah, Arcane Brim is for me A+ tier. Even regular Brim is A+ tier, but I prefer to go Arcane. Plus, the Brimstone itself has its own built-in burn mechanic, and that affects that also applies to the Arcane burn as well. It's the only thing in the game that'll do like burn on Arcane damage kind of thing, just because Brimstone itself has that mechanic built in. Flame Bracer, D-. It costs too much mana. They reduce the mana cost because they reduce the maximum mana, or they reduce mana of all the heroes, so they reduce the mana cost of the Flame Bracer. It's pretty garbage tier. Doesn't do a lot of damage. I don't know why you would ever bring it. It doesn't help you. There's many other... I mean, maybe if they didn't have lasers or Brimstone or like corridors for Aerowalls or like melee weapons, if they didn't have any of that, then sure, I could see it being used for like runners, for example. But all that other stuff's in the game, so there's no reason to bring it, no reason to ever use it. Floor Scorcher A+. I think as far as burning enemies with fire, I think Floor Scorcher is the way to go. I would never do the wall upgrade because there's better wall traps. I would always do the floor upgrade to increase the range. That increases your burn. It burns everything that it sees. So you want more enemies to burn, which means you want more range to have. It combos really, really well with other traps. I really, really like the Floor Scorcher. It is an A+ for me. I would put it in S-, I think, if enemies that flipped also got burned, but they don't. So yeah, A+, probably the best way to provide burn, because with the lasers you're gonna want to put them on lightning, not fire. Ceiling lasers, S tier. S tier indeed. Ceiling lasers are pretty good, even though they nerfed them from 25 to 19 damage, and people were like, oh my gosh, I can't play anymore because they nerfed them. No, they didn't. They put them back to where they were on Stadia days, except they didn't put the price back down. They just kept the price, but they put the damage back down, which is fine. The reason I use these pretty much all the time is to take care of runners. Runners are a problem. I have found myself not using these and then chasing down runners, and by the time I turn around, other enemies have left my kill box. And it's just really annoying, because then I have to clean up everything with the stone staff and a crossbow kind of idea, because my traps just couldn't pump out enough damage in enough time. So the lasers help a lot with that. Take 2 of them, a little bit of tar, and the cobalt runners are not going to get through. And then, everything else that gets through is going to be damaged slightly. It's not going to take care of anything else, but that's what they're there for. They are there for the runners, in my opinion. And it does its job so well. It's crazy. So yeah, for me, the lasers, they definitely get an S tier. They fit in a lot of good places. They're really good for the sprinkle damage. I always run a lightning on them. I used to be a fire laser kind of guy, and then I switched to lightning and never looked back. So yeah, they're really, really good. All right, let's talk about the Shock Zapper. I gotta put Shock Zapper at A-. I think Shock Zapper is a really good trap. It has a really high damage potential, but it only affects one enemy at a time, and it's on a bit of a cooldown, like an attack cooldown. Like, I don't know, once, I think it's a second. Every second it discharges, and it has like 7 charges total. It does a lot of damage. The stun is good. It's really good to put at the end of your kill box to take care of any of the remaining large enemies. But I don't know. It's not the best, and I would always get the stun upgrade. Always get the stun. Always. I don't know. Maybe not always, but I would definitely get the stun. Now, it is really accurate because it is a lightning attack that triggers onto an enemy, so it'll never miss, to include on runners. And the range is actually just like 1 square, which we talked about what a square is earlier, as far as its distance. It's like one, you could call like a half tile around. The trap itself is its actual trigger and usage range. So, it's pretty good. Yeah, I like it. You can put over barricades if you have like a nice little kill box, and it'll affect things on the other side of the barricade. But for me, in total, it gets an A- because it only affects one thing. It's better than the ballista because it has charges instead of just having one single attack. But it does a lot of damage, and it really, really helps a kill box, especially at the end of it, catch anything that's going through. It's really good for that. But for that reason, I give it an A-. Chain Lightning Staff. I gotta give Chain Lightning Staff a C. It's got potential, but the attack speed is too low. The right mouse button doesn't do a lot of damage, even if you hold and charge it up. Yeah, you can stun, but stun isn't really the best. We talked about the elements earlier. The other elements are better, and they last longer, like freeze and stone. Stoning lasts 3 seconds as well as stun, but stone also helps physical damage, so I'd rather bring that as a weapon. Yeah, it's mediocre. They're just the other weapons are just better. They're just better at everything that the Chain Lightning Staff can do. Other weapons are better at doing. So the only thing it has going for it is its headshot damage is really high, but that's it. Yeah. So for that reason, I gotta put it at C tier. Ring of Storms. Ring of Storms, I gotta put A+ tier. It really helps with those early game combos. Again, combos equals coin, coin equals killing, killing equals winning. and ease of gameplay. Plus, the I have had it. The lightning staff has a like a rift protection thing, and that has saved me a few times, leaking one random kobold. Also, that 0.5-second shock can be the difference between you losing that life and you not losing that life. But yeah, I really love just popping this thing in right at the very beginning. You know, your very first kill box, you're not gonna have a lot of money for it. So you pop this, you pop a stun staff, and all the enemies there, they're gonna be taking the extra electric damage and shock damage, and it really can help clear up a lot of enemies around you. So I like to bring this as my third kind of weapon. Almost, it's a trinket, but I like to think of it as a weapon to kind of just help clear out the first wave. That way I can sell my kill box and have enough money and not have to, like, you know, do any kind of chasing or any of that. So it really helps with that first wave. For that reason, I got to give it A+ tier. All right, wall charger. Wall charger is S-. Wall charger is S- because it has a long cooldown. It's pretty costly, I guess, you know, but it does so much damage. And the thing about lightning is it does the area effect damage to enemies killed, and wall charger kills. It does so much damage, it's going to kill everything except for like an ogre. Except on the second charge, it'll kill an ogre. So, like, it just does so much damage already. It's always going to kill things. There's no reason not to bring it, especially if you're going to go against big guys. It's a complete quality trap, right? Complete quality trap. It does what it's supposed to do, and it does it really well, especially if you get the stun on it. But I put in S- because it is a little bit on the pricier side, and it has quite a bit of a cooldown. But I think it's well worth the cost. So for me, personally, I put it on S-, but there are other good wall traps out there that can have a pretty good effect on all enemies. So yeah, for me, you know, it shares the space that other wall traps can be in, like the spike wall or the wall blades or the arrow walls and stuff like that. That's where it shares its wall trap space. But at the end of the day, I think it's probably the best one for that space that it takes up. All right, next one's up, Confusion Flower. I'm going to put Confusion Flower at A-. It's really good. The area of effect is really nice. That's the one you want. You don't want ceiling. You can put it behind a barricade, and it shoots over the barricade into your kill box. So if you have like an L-shaped barricade set up and you're pushing enemies against one wall, put the flower, and it's going to send enemies back. Really, really good. You know, the reason I give it A- is because it only does the one thing. It doesn't have good combos. It only does the one distraction. No damage, no other effects, just distraction. On top of that, I haven't really used it since the new patch. The new patch said pods were fixed and were more accurate and stuff. I think I maybe used it once, and it seemed to be a lot better than what it was, a lot more accurate. But at the end of the day, you know, there are better crowd control methods out there, and Confusion is not one of the better ones. It does send enemies back, so they'll kind of stack up on themselves again when they get out to the outside. But you know, if you're running for part-time, you may not want to run it because it won't really help you kill things any faster. And if you're running for endless, they're going to be running through the distraction faster with their crowd control reduction. So there's not really a great place for them, but they're not bad. They're definitely good to keep enemies in the same spot. And if you're trying to go for like high score combos, they can really, you know, siphon enemies, you know, away from each other. So that way you can take care of one enemy at a time. To like force the higher combos on one enemy at a time. So they have its usefulness. It's more of a afterthought than it is building around it, but they are still good, so I give them an A-. Flip Trap. Yeah, we're gonna put Flip Trap up here. Flip Trap for the same reason. Spike Wall is good. Flip Trap is good. Late game endless again. Enemies crowd control reduction. Flip Trap kills them instantly. Big guys to be included. Flip Trap is really good. Gravity Pillar has seen a resurgence in its score now, since enemies have crowd control reduction and have higher health and higher speed and all that. Gravity Pillars has become, in theory, the go-to trap for sappers, especially on something like Coastal Hallways. Depending on how you're building your barricades, they last for 8 seconds. They'll pull up all of the enemies, and you have some other wall trap there to just pump the damage. For example, the Saw Blade Launcher vertically. Put the Saw Blade Launcher down. And then all the enemies lifted up by the Gravity Pillar will be taking all the damage from Saw Blade launchers, and they will all die, and it lasts for the whole 8 seconds. So no matter how much crowd control reduction they have, the lift lasts the same amount of time, meaning because of crowd control reduction, they have bumped themselves up. And whenever they drop enemies, if they fall on top stairs, they'll roll down the stairs. They'll roll into each other. They'll get stuck on each other a little bit. It takes time for enemies to kind of recover from being affected by the gravity trap. So that's also a good reason. And when they're airborne, they take double damage. Also a good reason. Yeah, gravity pillars are just really good now. A+ tier for me. I probably wouldn't bring them unless I had like high ceilings on regular traps or regular maps, but endless, they really, really shine. Jar Ghosts for me gets an A tier. It's good for combos. Ranged enemies who attack you will run away after they attack you, so it's really good for survivability. You can pop it into a kill box, especially if you have like a little corridor or something. They'll hit it and they'll run back. I have seen enemies run through it for whatever reason. I think it's just a pathing issue, how they calculate where back is. They might run forward instead. But for the most part, it's pretty good. If you have like something on Coliseum and you're having a hard time taking care of the firelings that all come out, you can pop it. Firelings will run back. If you die, you just respawn and then jump down and take care of them, because it fears them for long enough and the fear lasts a long time when you use it. You can really help crowd control a lot of enemies. My favorite thing is that it makes ranged enemies stop targeting you, so that way you can do other things. And gnolls as well. Gnolls will attack you, and generally they can kind of slow lock you, unless you're playing Warwick to jump away, or Cygnus to sleep. But it's so much easier to just have them run away from you and then you run somewhere else than it is to try and maneuver around a gnoll. So these are really good for that. They're really good for melee. If you're going to melee build, you definitely want Jar Ghosts. It's just really good. Push trap, C-. For reasons mentioned before, the Pounder and probably just the Pounder really, and the Haymaker as well. It doesn't do anything to big guys. You could stun them, but again, stunning isn't the best crowd control. There's other better crowd controls out there. It doesn't do anything to them other than that. The damage is mediocre if you get the damage upgrade. It should do damage by itself, and then you can have two different upgrades, like a stun and a affects big guys, like something like that, right? That's what it should be, but no, it's not. Yeah, it's just one of those, you spam them and then you see that it just doesn't do so well. It's a quantity over quality, and quantity just doesn't work that well, in my opinion. Yeah. As you can tell, my least favorite weekly challenge is the one with the Pounders, the push traps, and the decoys. It's one of my least sought after weekly challenges of all time. Yeah, they're just not that great. They got to go on C- for me. Tar Trap is S+. The minute that they come out with the spider wall or the web wall or some other kind of slow that's consistent, yes, the grinder does have a slow possibility, but again, it goes on cooldown, so then the slow isn't used after that point of time. After they come out with something else, the tar is going to be unique in the way that it works and its placement, and it's pretty good to use all the time. I typically would not bring it, but there are instances where you don't need it, especially if you have enough freeze in an area, then you don't need them as much. But yeah, overall, tar's a really solid, a really good trap to use. It's an S+ from me. Wind Belt. I'm going to put Wind Belt in an A. I used to not use this very much, but I'm watching the streamer use it, and he does a really good job with it. He uses it pretty effectively. I think it really can be one of those saving graces of ranged weapons. Ranged weapons aren't the best at clearing out lots of enemies, but the Wind Belt can push them back and even push them over into hazards while you take care of the big guys that manage to slip through. And it can take care of Gnoll Grenadiers as well, so if Gnoll Grenadiers are a problem for you, you can just push them away, survive, kill the problem, push the rest of the guys off the edge. It doesn't cost a lot of mana. The right mouse button is good for testing. Pick an enemy up, put them into a kill box, and test the kill box. My biggest pet peeve is that it doesn't work all the time, because if the camera's not centered on your character, and like your back's up against the wall or something, then it won't go off. It'll use the mana and it'll look like it's going off, but then the enemies won't be affected. So that's unfortunate. The right mouse button's a little bit hard to use. You got to get used to it. So that's also unfortunate. But yeah, it's a really good, solid weapon to use. And I would encourage you, if you aren't using it already, try use it to just kind of push things away while you take care of whatever else is left. Window of Butterflies for me is an S tier. Window of Butterfly is an S tier because you can use it uniquely. You can put it on the 4th square above other traps, right? We've already talked about what a square is, but essentially a Window of Butterfly is 1 square tall. You can put it in the 4th square, and it will affect very heavy enemies and only very heavy enemies, which means you can double stack them. You can even triple stack them. Very heavy enemies are 4 squares tall, or 3 squares tall. Orcs are 2 squares tall, and kobolds are 1 square tall. So if you put the Window of Butterfly up on the 4th square, it'll only affect the very heavy enemies, pushing them backwards. That is a beautiful thing to be able to do, to sort of segregate the big guys from the small guys, or to only affect the big guys as they get through, and then if a small guy gets through, he can be affected by something else. Well, every butterfly trap you place is going to affect all of them, but the very big ones are only going to affect the big guys. So if a small guy gets through, he's not going to use a cooldown of a trap to take care of a big guy. That is a beautiful mechanic to use, and for that reason, I'm giving it an S tier. So much to fucking go through. Jesus Christ. All right, Deep Freeze. Deep Freeze for me is an A tier. You know, much like the Aerowall, it's really good, but it only shoots on the corridor. Unlike the Aerowall, it doesn't shoot farther than its trigger range. I wish it did. But its trigger range is really long. It's pretty good. Ice is really good. It's a good crowd control. In my opinion, probably the best crowd control there is ice. Other than like pushback or knockback or whatever. Or airborne even. But yeah, the freeze trap is a really good trap. It's a little bit situational in the fact that you need to use it in corridors. That's where it really shines. But yeah, it's good. I like ice in my loadout, and you know, I'm not opposed to using this. Don't ever get the acid upgrade for it. The range is really what you want, and ice is better than acid anyways, so go for ice. And for me, it gets an A tier. Alright, the Ice Amulet, S minus. And the S minus because it costs mana. The right mouse button costs a lot of mana. It does ice damage to our ice immune flyers. It doesn't take care of flyers as well as the Stone Staff does. Basically, the Stone Staff is the better version of the Ice Amulet, except for the fact that it cannot stone with range, which is always why I bring a crossbow as well. If I need something to stay where it is and it's at range, stun crossbow. And then I'll walk up to it and then I'll stone staff it as well, right? But, you know, it's not bad. The right mouse button with the area of effect damage is pretty good. It looks cool, but I think it just it falls short a little bit. And if you're trying to take care of enemies after they left your kill box, then the Ice Amulet has a hard time doing that, whereas the Stone Staff doesn't. If they're in your kill box, the Ice Amulet probably works a little bit better, if not just as good. But for enemies that leave your kill box, especially a lot of enemies, I think it's just kind of use up too much mana for that to really be where you would want to use it. You just use up too much mana. Snow Cannon. You get an A tier for the Snow Cannon. It's really good at what it does. It freezes well. A couple of problems, it gets stuck on corners or it's like sprays into walls. Sometimes it'll target the same enemy over and over again. Sometimes it won't. I don't exactly know how targeting works. But it doesn't seem to be great at targeting, but it's not bad. You know, it'll spray a bunch of enemies down. The range is cool. It's a nice range. I like it. It's a pretty good freeze trap, especially on places where, you know, a lot of times you'll have ceiling spaces that you're not using and like 1 square tiles, which is like, you know, the space of an archer, the space of a ballista, and I think these are the best thing to use in those spaces. Your only other option is really a ballista, but yeah, these are much better than ballistas, and they're actually pretty good overall. So for me, I like the Snow Cannon. I give it an A. There's something else to know. It shoots out 20 projectiles per second, just 1 damage for each projectile. So 20 damage a second, right? But the freeze happens with these projectiles. So if you're running endless, and endless mobs take a 80% reduction in crowd control, if it gets hit 20 times per second, it doesn't matter how much you reduce crowd control. It's going to be constantly frozen as long as the fire hose is spraying its ice on them. So for that reason, I would only do ice. I would never ever do acid on this. Always do ice, but it's also really good for endless as long as it hits the same enemy over and over again. So it's a little bit situational, and you use it in those, you know, the corner of your kill box where enemies are never going to walk to get affected by other sailing traps. That's where you use it. It has its usage. Way better than the Ballista, in my opinion. So for that reason, I got to give it an S tier. Or A tier, I'm sorry. A tier. All right, now let's talk about war scenario traps. Now, as far as what kind of traps I would bring in a war scenario traps is not one of those, except for the war outpost. I would generally not bring them because they A, don't do good combos, and B, they're not necessary to bring. You know, whenever I play, I use my mouse wheel to scroll through my hotbar, and if I have traps up on my shift 1 through 6 keys, I have to scroll through them in order to get to other things. So I typically don't bring anything in those options except for the war outpost. Depending on the map, even some maps I wouldn't use a war outpost. That way I can scroll through my whole entire hotbar much quicker and get to the traps or the trinkets or whatever if I'm using those that I need. On top of that, there are plenty of places that you want to place traps, but are inside. You cannot place the war scenario traps inside. Okay. There are some maps that have exclusive inside lanes that you cannot use war scenario traps in. So just based upon the way the maps are built, there are limited opportunities to use them anyways, as well as they're not combo useful, and they're also not very necessary to bring in the first place. So for all those reasons, I wouldn't use war scenario traps in a war scenario, but if I did, here's the rankings I would give them. Bank of Archers, an A. They got good damage. They do kind of spread their shots out so they don't target anything in specific, but they have really good range, really good damage. Overall, they're pretty powerhouse. They're a powerhouse kind of trap, and yeah, I mean, they don't come back or whatever, but they have such a large platform. They're easy to sell, and they're easy to protect. So for that reason, Bank of Archers gets an A. Okay, Bowling Boulder. It gets a D+. It gets a D+ because it needs to do one thing. It needs to trigger when enemies are next to it or in front of it. That's when it needs to trigger, not when you shoot it. You can also shoot it. It needs to be like the beehive, basically. The beehive tree, where enemies walk next to it and then it drops and it confuses them and does damage and sends them back, right? This needs to have a trigger range as well as allow you to shoot it to trigger it itself. When you place these, if you're doing a war scenario and you've got a gate that has these around it and you're over at another gate, these aren't doing a thing. They are just sitting there, not doing anything. If you need to go take care of Craig on front lawn, or not front lawn, if you need to go take care of Craig on the lava pits, for example, and you've got these over on the other side of your bridge, they're not being used. So why did you bring them? I don't know. Why would you have them? I don't know. They're cool in design, but they need to be able to trigger by themselves. Because they can't, they're not super useful. I had to give them a D+. Like, they're probably the worst one out of all of them. It's D+ for me. All right, Giant Flip Trap. I'm going to give it an A-. It's fun to watch. It's fun to use. You can place it indoors with the indoor upgrade. But it's got a long cooldown. It doesn't throw the big guys very far. I wish it threw the big guys a little bit farther. Then I'd probably put it up higher. But yeah, it's an A- for me. It's pretty good. It's a lot of fun to use. It's got a big footprint, so it affects a lot of enemies that are on it. If you can get a lot of enemies on it. Yeah. So for me, it's an A-. I think it's in a good place, but I just think it needs to maybe affect the big guys a little bit better. Giant Killer Beehive for me gets an A tier. The Giant Killer Beehive is a really good trap. Probably the second war scenario trap I would realistically bring if I was trying to do something, I don't know, somewhat war-like realistically. It's really good. It affects the bosses, so that's something. It triggers on its own, and you can trigger it as well if you want to, which is nice. You can put it in front of a gate, and it'll continuously, like, confuse the enemies and push them away from the gate kind of thing. yeah, I think what it does, what it's supposed to do, it does it really well, and it's really effective. So, yeah, I really got nothing too bad to say about it, other than it's a worse scenario trap. Yeah, but for that reason, I gotta put it A. All right, let's talk about the knight. They're really tanky, really beefy. You know, bosses don't really care about your war scenario guys. I guess the only one that really attacks you is Chromatica, but he's an indoor boss, so it wouldn't even matter for him. But yeah, so the knight is really good, really powerful. You know, enemies, when you stack a bunch of them, you can really clear out a bunch, and you can actually do the whole war scenario stuff with just like knights or whatever. On some of them, anyways. So they're pretty good. They're good damage and all that, but you know, they're war scenario traps, so they're really, honestly, probably middle of the road. But as far as war scenario traps are concerned, they do what they're supposed to do. They do it really well. They're just really expensive, and they don't heal passively whenever they're not fighting. I wish they did, and that's the reason I'm giving them an S-. All right, Mega Boom Barrel Roller, I'm going to put it at B. You know, it's one of the ones that I initially thought were really, really good, but it's kind of fallen to the wayside to some of the other ones. You know, I like to put a nice little giant tar pit, like 3x3 tar traps, and in the center do like an acid trap, and then have the boom barrel and just keep sitting there and pummeling over and over again. The problem is the big guys will get through, and you got to leave, go take care of them, come back, and then by the time you come back to sit down and use the catapult, you've already leaked enemies, other enemies that you got to jump out and go take care of and come back. And so it's just a lot of management that's not necessary. Plus, not very good for combos because it kills everything, or kills all the small guys instantly, so you're not getting any kind of good combos there. Yeah, so for me, it's a B tier. All right, Priestess time. Where's my S tier? Here it is. I think Priestess is better than Knights because they have the area effect damage, they have range damage, they attack things at a range, and they typically stay at a range as well. You know, they have a little bit more survivability than Knights because they don't take the damage initially, but if you combo them with Knights and Archers, in the Bank of Archers, for example, they really start to shine. Whereas Knights paired with other things, they don't really shine any differently, but the Priestesses are really good. I like them a lot. And I don't remember if they passively heal. I don't think they do when they're not being activated. So again, that'd be something I would change. Let them passively heal, but whatever. They're good. They're good anyways, the way they are. Rapid Fire Ballista, I put it at B+. Only because in the same instance that the catapult isn't the greatest, because by the time you take care of the problem, you come back and you got more problems to deal with. The Ballista is the same way. It's a mountable war scenario trap, but it can stun bosses, and that's really, really good. At a range, it can stun bosses. It's really cool. It looks freaking sweet, but unfortunately, it just falls a little bit to the wayside of the other traps because it's not automatic. I don't think it should be. I just don't think. I just don't like it too much. If you're playing co-op, then these are definitely good ones to go for. But this is a solo list, so yeah, I gotta put them at B+. All right, Snowblower, I'm putting it at C tier. It needs to be able to be placed indoors. That's what it needs to do. It doesn't cost a lot, but it doesn't do a lot either. So you're much better off using other traps. I mean, it has such a large footprint. It's hard to combo with other traps. They did help it with their with the buff they gave it, where it triggers quicker and stuff like that. But yeah, maybe it needs to be a duration trap. So like when the enemy walks over it, or even not even an enemy walk over triggering, it just always blows snow or whatever. I think that would be pretty cool. But yeah, for right now, I just gotta give it a C tier. Tornado in a Box gets me B tier, B-, I should say. I don't like it very much. It's pretty inconsistent with where it goes, how it rolls. If you could control it with barricades, I'd like it a lot more. The freeze upgrade is probably the one I go for. The physical damage is fine, but again, it kills things too quickly for combos, and one of the issues with it is it'll sometimes fling enemies into your rift. depending on where you use it and what map you're on. So for me, I typically don't like using it, but it looks cool. If you spam a bunch of them, especially in sandbox mode, I mean, it probably look really cool. But yeah, overall, I just I gotta put it in B-. War Outpost, however, is an S+ tier. If I'm fighting outside, especially on the first 2 war scenario maps, I am using War Outpost, always. You can make really nice kill boxes with it. It is its own, you know, ceiling, wall, floor. It has its own stuff. It's a really good trap. I don't know why you wouldn't use it. Use it to like make your own kill boxes outside on other war scenarios. You know, group all the enemies up, kill them all at once, get those combos going. This is a really good trap to do that with. I'm glad they have it in the game. So for me, this gets an S+ tier. Okay, almost done with the list. Almost done. Empty Rift Scroll. C tier. It's insurance. You know, if you need it because you're leaking, you need to just have a better kill box or better setup, then you don't need it. Probably. Depending on part time and stuff, you know, I would bring it on like... If part time was a lot shorter, then I would not build as much in a kill box and let enemies through. That way they get through faster, depending on the map. And then I would maybe use it more often. But because part times are where they're at, I don't need to use it. I can build a slower killing kill box and just have it be more effective, and then not have leaks. You know. So right now, the state of the game, I don't use it like it's there. It could be used, but if I don't need it. I've never used it in a serious game, really. So unless I'm giving myself a challenge, I just don't need it. Yeah. So Empty Rift Scroll for me is a C tier, but I know other people use it. There's nothing wrong with it, but just for me, I just don't have a purpose to bring it. Freedom Trinket gets a D tier. You know, it got better than what it was. It's only better now because the flyers. And if you get the passive resistance, it will make you resist the shock from the shock bats, the freeze from the freeze bats, the burn from the fire bats, and the damage over time from the bile bats. You'll not take any of that. Plus, you won't get slowed by gnolls, and you won't get stunned by ogres. Pretty good if you're running melee. If you need to, Freedom Trinkets, it's okay, I guess. But it's just easy enough to dodge all of that stuff, or to kill the bats before they attack you, or to keep your distance from an ogre before you can crowd control them, or that sort of thing, right? It's just easier to play around this mechanics than it is to need to bring this. But if you're having a hard time with that, then by all means, bring the Freedom Trinket. I could see it maybe being useful in Order Enclave, because the bats come out of both sides in the center, and you might get frozen and then die, and then it's a short distance to the rift from where you died. So maybe Order Enclave, but that's really it. That's the only place I could realistically see somebody using it effectively. Healing Trinket takes a D+. You know, mana is more valuable than health. I mean, it does what it says it does. It heals you and it gives you more maximum health, but, you know, dying isn't really a problem, so Healing Trinket isn't really necessary, right? Mana Rage Trinket. The best way to regenerate your mana is to die if you run out. So, you know, Mana Rage Trinket kind of takes a backseat into dying. But it's still good. I use it on Slagfield. Any map with flyers where I'm going to need to use the Stone Staff a lot, you know, Mana Rage Trinket is definitely good. It's just not necessary. You know, there's better ways to do everything in the game. But if you're having a hard time managing your mana, or if you're trying to use the Ice Amulet or something, then the Mana Rage Trinket could definitely help complement some of that other stuff you've got. Trap Reset Trinket, I'm putting in an A+ tier. Not only can it heal your barricades if you get the barricade heal, but it also reduces by a percentage, by 10% by default, probably 15 or 20% with the upgrade. I'm not sure if it's 15 or 20. With the other passive upgrade, it's really, really good for healing barricades, though. On top of that, I know it says it's an area of effect for the trap reset, but I'm fairly confident that it's the entire map. Like, to be honest, I've used it from far, far away, and it resets a lot of things. So if that area is supposed to be an area that's definitely not, maybe that'll nerf it a little bit if they made it an actual area. But I've I've not known it to be an area so much so that I didn't even know that was in the tooltip for the trap or for the trinket itself. But I think it is. Yeah, it resets all your traps, and you can instantly kill a lot of things. You have a bunch of dudes up in your kill box, you just pop it, and all of a sudden they're not there anymore. Like, where did they go? I don't know. So trap reset trinket, definitely A+. Really good for combos as well. All right, last thing we need to talk about are the heroes. Don't worry about don't worry about like the duplicate stuff down here. These are just the skins and other stuff. All right, let's talk about heroes though. Cygnus S+. Cygnus is S+ because you can sleep, you can ignore nulls, or enemies ignore you completely. Okay, enemies ignore you completely. If you sleep on tar, then the very heavy enemies will sometimes get stuck on you if you have like a 1 square corridor or 1 tile corridor. Enemies can sometimes get stuck on you, which is nice. So you can cheese that if you really wanted to. But I think the best part about it is you can assassinate, right? You can sleep in front of a gate that has sappers, pop out of your sleep, stone staff them, shoot them with a crossbow or whatever else you got, and then go right back to sleep. If your kill box is good enough to take care of itself and you don't need to be there, Cygnus is your guy. Completely your guy. He can take care of the sappers, he can take care of the fire elementals, the fire lords, whatever. He can take care of them before they become a problem. And then, if he's getting attacked by gnolls or TNT archers from far away, he can just double jump, immune to damage while he is falling asleep. He falls asleep, they ignore him. They walk past him, they walk into the kill box, they die, he comes back up, and he can take care of whatever's left. Easy peasy. That mechanic is really, really good. If you're co-op and you're the second person and you sleep, you can sometimes get stuck, so be careful with that. But so they fix that. I mean, Cygnus is still S+ tier, okay? Egan. Oh, I forgot. With Cygnus, you can also sleep inside your kill box to see how good your kill box is doing. What's doing the damage, how, you know, what's doing the combos, what does it look like for your cooldowns, does it make sense for you to have traps where you have them, you know, what are your saw blades doing, how are they bouncing, that sort of thing. Cygnus can also watch all that stuff without the fear of needing to be, like, close to death or whatever. Egan, S+ tier. You can play the game without weapons if you play Egan. And not having to have a weapon is pretty freaking sweet. Okay? None of the other heroes really can realistically do that, but Egan can. So, if you're going endless, you typically want to bring Egan. Plus, he's a ×3 combo by himself. A knockback, a stun, and damage. ×3 combo. For the big guys, it's only ×2 because it's a stun and damage. But still, I mean, a character that can stun versus traps that can stun, you can see why traps that stun aren't really the best traps to use, right? Just because of the stun aspect is achievable with just a hero action, right? So yeah, Egan is definitely S+ tier, easily. Those two are the top tier guys. Plus, they have the highest mana pool, and like I said earlier, mana is more valuable than health because mana helps you kill things, whereas health just helps you survive. Surviving isn't killing; killing is killing. Therefore, you want mana over health, and these two have the highest mana to health ratios. Cygnus having this like 10 higher for 10 less health. Gabriella, D-. Her special doesn't do anything. She's middle of the road, 150, 150 health and mana. If you want mana, go for the top two. If you want abilities, go for anybody else. Yeah, nope. Yep, not good. Okay, Kelsey, she's a B+. I think her double jump, they improved, but, you know, I think it shouldn't cost mana, and it should just be a lot slower movement, maybe. Or when she stops, she can regenerate mana, and then she can keep going. I guess maybe they don't want people, like, flying off of the map, possibly. But at a certain point, you'll hit a wall, right? And it's just not going to be useful for you to fly all the time. So, I don't know why they wouldn't allow it, but... yeah, it's okay. It's just not one of the best. Max. We're gonna put Max. I forgot when my A tier starts and ends, but we're gonna put him. I think it's right next to there. I think it's an A tier, right? So we're gonna put Max in A tier. His double jump is pretty good for getting up places. I like it on Slagfield. Him or Vorwick really can kind of do the same thing. It's not like super unique and it's not super necessary to have, but it's not bad. He has higher mana pool than Vorwick does, so he gets an A, and Vorwick gets an A-. Vorwick gets an A- because he has the lower health pool, or lower mana pool, I should say. He has the highest health pool out of all the heroes, but the lowest mana pool. And mana is more important than health, period. So yeah, his double jump is nice. If they made, and we have a mod out there to make the switchbacks an actual story mode map kind of thing. For that map specifically, I would only bring Vorwick because he can double jump and teleport straight through the map to get to the other side as fast as possible, because you need to. If that map is going to be an actual map, you have to have Vorwick. Like, running anyone else is ludicrous. You're not going to make it in time. But because it's not an official map, there's really no reason to play Vorwick over anybody else on any other maps. So, you know, and it's an endless map, so it doesn't matter how much time it takes. For that reason, Vorwick gets an A-. But if that was an actual map, I'd give him an A+, because you'd have a reason to choose him. But yeah, anyways, this has been a long video. It's been a long recording. Don't forget to leave a like, comment, subscribe, follow. Let me know what you think about my rankings and about each of the individual traps themselves. Would you use any differently than I've suggested? Would you care to put any in different places? You let me know. Tell me if you really liked or disliked some of the traps. Maybe you haven't tried some of the ones I put up top. Maybe you really love some of the ones I put down bottom, and you have something that you use other than saying that you like spamming floor spikes, which I understand. Okay, I just don't think it's that great of an idea. But, you know, let me know what you think about them. My tier list, I'd like to see what you guys think in the comments. If you have maybe a different one, just write it all out. You know, tell me what you think each of them deserve, and maybe a little bit of a reason why. And I look forward to reading all about it. And, yeah, you guys have been wanting this for a while. You know, I've been a little hesitant to make it because of the update happened. I made a video before the update, and then the update, and then I had to try stuff out. And, yeah, just let me know what you think, and hope I didn't repeat myself too often. It's been a long video. And I'll see you guys on the flip side.